Hi, in the last episode, we discussed about grief. Today we will see what happens when grief is prolonged or gets complicated. I'm delighted to welcome you to another episode of Mindscape Matters. I'm Dr. Mohan Raj. I'm a consultant psychiatrist based in Chennai, and I'll be with you as we discuss various facets of mental health. When is grief considered to be prolonged? Some of us would ask, who are we to decide whether somebody's grief is normal or prolonged? Yes, that's true. Each person grieves differently, and some might grieve for a long time. But what if somebody is grieving for, say, 6 months, 1 year, 2 or 3 years? The World Health Organization, WHO, based on research, denotes somebody's grief as prolonged if it exceeds 6 months or 1 year. WHO also quickly adds that if a particular cultural practice is to grieve for more time, don't call it as prolonged grief. Prolonged grief is one in which the person grieves for more than 6 months to 1 year. He or she has persistent and pervasive. The pervasive, the word means all the time. Persistent and pervasive preoccupation with the thoughts of the departed, and a persistent and pervasive longing for the departed one. In addition, the person has emotional pain in terms of denial, anger, depression, blaming, and disturbed sleep. Some authors call prolonged grief as complicated grief. A grief can be complicated when the grief is prolonged and the person becomes severely depressed or decides on suicide or is socially or occupationally dysfunctional. There are people who have resolved their grief, and when the birthday or death anniversary of the loved one comes, or if they are married on their wedding anniversary, the grief returns for 1 or 2 weeks and it can be severe. This is completely normal, and we are not including them while we are discussing prolonged grief. Let us look at the factors contributing to prolonged grief. Guilt is one of the main factors. I've seen persons feeling severe guilt about their 80 or 90-year-old parent passing away due to cancer. I should have screened her more frequently. I should have detected the cancer earlier. Should have gone to this hospital instead of that. Should have consulted this doctor instead of that. Should have started on this chemotherapy instead of that. If only I had done these, my mother would have been still alive. I am responsible for her death. This guilt and self-blame prolong and complicate grief. If cancer in a loved one can cause this much of guilt, you can imagine the guilt if the death is by accident or suicide. I was driving. The light turned green. I should have waited to see whether some rogue driver is jumping the signal. I turned right because the green light was on. But a car came from the opposite direction and hit us. My friend who was sitting next to me died in the impact, and I am responsible. Even if the survivor was not involved in the accident, they can feel guilty for letting the loved ones meet with an accident. One person said, I insisted that he should visit me that day and he died on the way to my place. Or, I should have taken him in a car. I was late and allowed him to travel by his bike. If the death is by suicide, the person who is left behind has guilt like, I should have been more sensitive to his emotions. Even when he told me about his mood, I did not take it seriously. I just reassured him and said, this too will pass. I should have done something differently. The guilt by survivors of a disaster like an earthquake, flood, a boat tragedy, or a tsunami can be prolonged. They would have lost many of their close family members and friends. He or she would have been one of the very few who were rescued. They grieve their loved ones, and in addition, they feel guilty that somehow they were selfish in saving themselves and not others. As we saw in the few examples, guilt can be a powerful factor in prolonging and complicating grief. I tell the persons to let go of the grief. Now, how do we let go of the grief? Let's discuss that in detail in a separate episode later. Another factor that can prolong grief is the loving bond with the person. This is seen in the death of a marital or romantic partner or in the death of a child. No amount of words of comfort would be enough to console them. Another factor which can prolong grief is dependent personality traits. Some parents are overprotective and never allow their children to blossom into independent adults. These children, even when they are chronologically 50 or 60 years of age, tend to have prolonged grief when they lose a parent on whom they were dependent. Their lament will be, "My father would have guided me into taking the right decision in this situation. He is not there now. What will I do without him? Who is there to guide me?" Another factor, there are people who think that if I stop grieving and enjoy the activities of daily living, I am betraying my loved ones. And they continue to be in grief, and they think that is how they stay united with the departed one. I ask them, what would your loved one want you to do? Would they want you to continue grieving, suffer and be miserable, or would they want you to enjoy every day? Another factor is being lonely and not having enough social support. Cultures around the world have inherent protective mechanism to help a person go through grief and resolve it well. We will see these cultural practices in a separate episode a little later. Thank you for staying this far. If you like this video, tell 4 of your friends. Tell them there is a Tamil version also. Stay tuned because Mindscape matters. Bye.